Okay, my name is Nancy McCaffrey. I'm interviewing Albert J. Tyroler on November 9th, 2018 for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, and we are at Emma Clark Library in Setauket. So, would you like to be called Albert or Al?
Al is good.
Okay. So, Al, when were you born and where?
22 February 1935 in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
I only stayed there for 4 days.
Okay, and then where did you go?
I went to St. Albans, Queens. My mother was in a maternity hospital, which they still had in those days. And then I went to St. Albans, Queens.
And that's where you grew up?
What?
You grew up there?
Yeah. Let me see, the address was 199-64, 199th Street.
Okay. And that
I grew up there and went went to PS 136 as a grade school, and that was in those days 1 through 8.
Okay.
And I went for my first year to Andrew Jackson High School, that was on Springfield Boulevard, and probably still is. And then my parents moved into Jamaica, and I finished my high school in Jamaica High School.
Okay, good.
Which no longer exists.
Okay.
I mean, the building is being used for other things.
Okay. So who are your parents and what were their occupations?
My mother was Rose Tyroler. She was one of 2 daughters of my maternal grandparents. And she basically was a housekeeper and acted as a receptionist for my father's office, who was an optometrist.
And what was his name?
His name was Sidney.
Okay. Did he have his office in the house?
No, he had an office at, first he rented space in Montgomery Wards in Jamaica, which Montgomery Wards of course no longer exists. And then he had an office at 15303 Jamaica Avenue in a building owned by John and Larry Adikes.
Oh, okay.
Who owned the Jamaica Savings Bank and the Growell Feed Company, which became now Growell, is still in existence. They make fertilizers and stuff.
And did you have any siblings?
My father had a sister, Ethel, and her married name became Fabricant. And he had a brother whose name was Felix, and he had another sister. I can't quite remember her name. She died at age 10, I think.
Oh, okay. How about you? Did you have siblings?
I have one sibling. His name is Ronald Tyroler. He's 3 years younger than I am, and he died of ventricular fibrillation about 3 years ago.
Okay. And was he in the military as well?
He was in the Army for 6 months. I'm going to shed this now.
Sure, great. For 6 months, and then.
Well, he was in for active duty for 6 months, and then he was in the reserves.
Oh, okay, okay. So, what did you do before you entered the service?
Before I entered the service, I went to grade school, high school, and I started college at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and that's where I had my first service experience. I joined a Air Force ROTC,
Okay.
which was probably the most fun of anything that I had done in the service, although I haven't had a bad time. But because I qualified to be in a squad of 16 cadets, and then we had, of course, a leader, and we practiced what was called the Queen Anne's Manual of Arms, which is very, very intricate, where you do things much differently from regular handling of rifles for marching. And we often did it with bayonets attached, so you had to be really precise and careful. And we practiced a lot, but they sent us often to by bus to high school sporting events to assist the recruiters. So we would give a demonstration, and they would present colors, and they would try and recruit people for any branch of the service.
So this was in college?
This was in 1954.
And how long were you in that?
I was in that. I only stayed in Miami University for I entered in January, and I stayed through the summer, and then I went to transferred to Pacific University in Forest Grove, Oregon, which had a college of optometry.
Oh, you wanted to be an optometrist like your dad.
And I stayed there only a year because there was some complex political business with optometry where I had been accepted to Columbia University, but Columbia University closed its College of Optometry because the College of Physicians and Surgeons was always trying to suppress the optometrists. And I didn't find out until many years later that all the people who had been accepted to the Columbia class there, rather than let them just founder around, each of the existing College of Optometries agreed to send a letter to a particular candidate, and you only got one. So you got one acceptance. So I was assigned to Pacific. Other people later on I found out were assigned to Ohio State, Pennsylvania College of Optometry. So I went to Pacific University, and then they changed the law in New York State. Originally the law said the College of Optometry had to be affiliated with the university. And they changed the law, realizing that there was not that many colleges. They changed the law saying that any College of Optometry that was accredited could accept things. So then I switched from Pacific University back. I started at the Massachusetts College of Optometry, which has since changed its name to the New England College of Optometry as a thing. And that's where my Army Reserve started. While I was in Boston, I enlisted in the Army Reserve so that I wouldn't get drafted at that time because it was post-Korea, and I then went during the summers to Camp Drum in Watertown, New York, upstate, which now is used for the Army's Mountain Division. But at that time we went up there every, 2 weeks out of each. Once I became a corporal, I was allowed to go up on what they called advance party, where you could go with your car, and so several of us did that. And I had an unusual job there, since we had a hospital under tents, and I was in the 307th General Hospital, and since I was all under tentage, you had to put the Red Cross flags up on the top of the tents. And at that time, I only weighed 127 pounds, so I was the lightest guy. So I got the job of going up the seams and crawling along because I was the lightest guy, they figured they wouldn't break the tents or tear through, right? And that went on for I guess about 8 years till I left the service probably was in 1963.
Okay, let's not get too far
Okay.
ahead. But while you were in the reserves, you were still going to school.
I was still going to school,
Okay.
and eventually I graduated and became an optometrist.
Okay.
Obviously, I did. And when that happened, I switched back to a reserve unit in Queens, which is where I grew up, right?
Mhm.
And that reserve unit the other one met at the Boston Army base, which was actually, it was a big warehouse, really, that's all it was. And it was just adjacent to the Boston Naval Base,
Okay.
which was interesting because I guess I was bootlegging beer or something at the time.
You were?
Yeah, you could buy, they had a ridiculous sign on the Boston Navy base. They had a PX where they sell beer, and the sign said, limit 6 cases per man per day. So obviously you couldn't drink that much. But I took orders from the various fraternities in Boston, and I would split the difference between the PX value and the retail value.
So that was your sideline,
It
sort
was
of?
it was my money to pay for my dates.
So you were in the Army and you didn't enlist, you just went into the reserves.
Yeah, my serial number starts with ER, which stands for Enlisted Reservist.
Okay. Now, did you have to go to basic training or anything?
I took basic training to a limited extent, not as much as they usually do, which is usually 6 months. I took it at Camp Drum over a period of time, but I had to learn how to throw grenades and, target shoot,
Right.
the usual thing, right?
Yeah. So what was the camp life like?
In Camp Drum it was fine because I was a member of this 307th General Hospital at the time I did it, and we were sleeping under tentage, but they were big tents. They weren't these small tiny. Although I did have when we went out bivouacking, I got a small pup tent, or what they call the shelter half. You gotta button it together with another person, and you could share it.
So, excuse me, if you were actually called out for service, what would your job have been?
Well, I was my MOS, military occupational specialty, was a EENT specialist, eye, ear, nose, and throat. They were trying to take advantage of the fact that I was in optometry school, right? I think they now don't include eyes with the nose, ear, nose, and throat. I think they now have split those into separate
Okay,
things.
so you would have been taking care of people with ear, nose, or throat
Well,
problems?
I acted. I helped run sick call. I was trained as an optometrist, so I ran the sick call for that unit and for any of the other units that were in Camp Drum.
Oh, okay.
There were times when the New Jersey Blues, which is a tank division, came up there. Right? It was very interesting because they would, since they couldn't make it with the guys in the 2.5-ton trucks and all the tanks on trailer, they couldn't make it in one day. They would bivouac in the clover leaves and have a field kitchen of the New York State Thruway.
So they would stay there overnight, you
Yeah,
said?
they would stay there overnight.
Wow.
They couldn't make it from New Jersey up to there because they were carrying all this equipment.
Okay.
My unit, when I transferred to New York, I went to a different general hospital.
Where was that?
They assigned it to me, and that met in Queens on the campus of St. John's University,
Okay, so
one day a week.
okay, let me get this straight. You were in school,
Well, by that time I was out of
Oh,
school.
you were out of school?
Yeah.
So you still had to go 1 day a week for the
Still-
reserves?
1 day a week and 2 weeks each summer.
Oh, okay. That's a little different. I know they still do the 2 week, 1 day a week anymore, do they?
Well, I don't know, what
Yeah,
they do,
I don't
but that's what
know.
they did then, at that
Okay.
time.
So,
As a matter of fact, what was interesting was the executive officer, who was a Major Moylan, he always said to me, if you're an optometrist, we have space in the general hospital for 2 optometrists. And one of them was a guy that I knew from Queens. He had a practice, and his name was Leon Levy, and he was an optometrist. And he said to me, why don't you take the other space? And I'd say, the problem is, if you look around in this unit, there are medical officers who were in practice before World War II, and then got drafted,
mm,
and then they came back, they opened a new practice, and they went to Korea, and they opened a new practice again. I said, so I don't want the liability. For most units, they call a whole unit. If you're an engineer's unit, they call the whole engineer unit. But for healing arts professionals, if they are calling a general hospital and they need a surgeon, they'll go get a surgeon from a different unit and just
okay.
ask for a surgeon, or whatever the specialty is. So I decided not to become an officer.
Become an officer.
I stayed as an enlisted man, and eventually I became, as you could see, a staff sergeant.
Right. So, how did you progress up to staff sergeant? How does that work?
Well, by the time I got to, the time I left Boston and graduated from optometry college, by that time I was already a corporal.
Okay.
And then when I got into New York, I became a sergeant, and then eventually a staff sergeant.
Okay. So when you were still in reserves, going that 1 day a week, 2 weeks a year in the summer, did you have a practice at home?
I did. I at that time. Well, first I went to work for somebody else,
Okay.
and then my father died at age 56,
Mhm.
and I went to work in that practice, which was still in his estate, right? And eventually my brother became an optometrist, and
Oh.
he graduated, and he came into the practice with me.
Oh, that's nice.
Then there was a lot of family. My mother wouldn't relinquish the practice. She was the administrator, and she wouldn't relinquish the practice to my brother and I. Now, that really is contrary to the law, because the law says a lay person can't own any professional practice in there. And eventually, I just left. I went somewhere else. I got a job for a while. Then I established a practice here in Stony Brook.
Oh, okay. And how long were you in practice here?
In Stony Brook, I don't. From 19. I would say 59. Another 4 years. Maybe from 1962. Or, yeah, we moved out here in 1962. And at that time I had a practice that was on one side of my house, which faces Nichols Road. That's the reason we bought that piece of property. I had another practice in Patchogue, which I had bought from somebody who died about 2 months later. He had cancer. And I became one of the initial instructors for the new College of Optometry
Oh,
that the State University formed.
Oh, so
which
you
was in
taught as
Manhattan.
well.
And I taught there for 28 years until I basically retired for health reasons. So,
Now I see something about, what was it?
I had an interesting I had an interesting experience as a sergeant, or at that point almost a staff sergeant. Instead of going to Camp Drum, one year my unit went to Valley Forge Army Hospital.
That's up in Pennsylvania?
It's in Pennsylvania, so it's right near Valley Forge.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's a regular fixed Army hospital, right? And
Like a veterans hospital? Veterans
no,
hospital?
it's for not for veterans, for any active duty personnel.
Oh, okay. And
Or their families, if they need them. Families get medical care, And so, since it was summertime, a few of the sergeants decided in advance we would take our wives with us. And at that time I had a small trailer, so we parked our trailer near. The others stayed in motels and everything else. And all you had to do was make sure that in the morning you got up in time to go to formation, which was, 6 o'clock.
Right.
And they had a guard at the door, but if you had a uniform on, a guard at the gate,
Right.
they would let you in.
Yeah.
And our wives often ate with us. Right? You had to pay for a meal, but the fee was very, very low.
Yeah.
And if they weren't using the swimming pool for therapeutic purposes for patients, our wives swam in the swimming pool. At night we would go out and do other things.
So like a little mini vacation.
It was a mini vacation, yeah.
Did you see patients while you were there?
Well, I still wasn't an optometrist in the
Oh,
thing,
you
but
still weren't?
no, I never became an optometrist in the thing. I never got a commission, otherwise I would have captain's bars.
Oh, okay.
Right? So,
So what did you do there for
what did I do? I did whatever they wanted me to do as a dispensary specialist. I ran as you sick call for people, right? Gave shots to people who needed to get
okay.
antibiotics.
So you were allowed to do that even though you weren't a medical doctor?
Yeah, because it's like a nurse does that in this country, right?
That's true.
Right, and so corpsmen do that all the time.
Right.
The unit that I was in when we were in Camp Drum each year, you always wonder about how they determine things. There was a regular army soldier who was stationed in Camp Drum, or maybe he was in another unit that was having training there for the summer. Or maybe he was a permanent member. I guess he must have been a permanent member there. And he was apparently drunk, and he was going to see his girlfriend, and he tripped over a railroad track, right, and got a concussion, right, and was out of duty for 6 months or something like that. But the ruling was that it was in line of service. Getting drunk and visiting your girlfriend. How they determine that, I never figured out.
How long total were you in the reserves?
8 years.
Oh, okay. 8 years. And you never had any, you never were worried about being called up or anything?
Well, I was only activated once when I was in Boston, right?
What was it?
Way back in the Suez Crisis.
I thought I saw that in here somewhere.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now the Suez Crisis was, I don't remember, somebody took over the Suez Canal, maybe Egypt, right? But we were activated and it only lasted 3 or 4 days. And we nowadays they do that all by texting people or everything else, but in those days they had announced it on the radio and television and tried to call you if you had a phone. But I was a student, I didn't have a telephone, right?
So how did you find out?
I heard it on the radio.
So they would say a certain unit has to report?
Yeah, we can know that. And so we slept on the floor of the Boston Army base, right?
Okay, so you went from New York to Boston?
No, I was
You were
in
still
Boston at the
okay.
time of that. I think the Suez Crisis was in 57, 58, I'm not sure. Right? At any rate, it only lasted 3 or 4 days because France and Britain sent troops to Suez, and then Egypt withdrew.
Okay, so you really didn't go overseas or anything?
No. But they did. We did think we were going to go because we could see the railroad sidings by the Boston Army, by the Boston Navy base, which is right adjacent to us, and they brought in. They had kept all the equipment for our unit in Danvers, Massachusetts, which is about 30 miles north and west of Boston, and they brought in these freight cars, and it was on the side stenciled 373rd General Hospital on the side of this whole trainload of cars, which had everything. It had everything in it except antibiotics, which spoil. But it had all the tentage for enough for 2,000 beds, jeeps, ambulances.
So were you up for going, or were you kind of disappointed that you didn't go?
At that point, I had no control over it. It was whatever happened, happened.
Yeah. Okay. So then you stayed in for 8 years. Did you ever use the GI Bill for anything? No.
Never have.
Wow.
Because I didn't have enough active duty.
Oh, how much active duty do you need
I
to
think
get
you
that?
need a minimum of 6 months.
Oh, and I guess all those little days didn't add up to.
No.
Oh, okay. So what made you decide to get out of the reserves?
It's a decision I kind of, in later years now, realize I shouldn't have done it. I did it because my daughter was born in '63, right? And I waited another year or so, and I said, "Oh, I'm afraid they'll activate me." And in retrospect, I realized that they would only have activated the whole unit. They would have had a major conflict to activate a general hospital. And a general hospital never is in the front lines anyway.
That's true.
It's too big, too cumbersome. They have, those so-called MASH hospitals in the front lines.
Right. Yeah. So that's why you left, because you had children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you stay in contact with any of the people you met in the reserves?
There's one guy that I spoke to him last about 7 or 8 years ago. His name was Jimmy Pitts.
I guess it's hard to...
An Afro-American, right? I remember at that time when we would go out to service clubs and whatever, that he was the first person I ever saw that would drink beer with tomato juice in it, which I understand other people do. The Mexicans do that all the time, and the dance that was popular at that time would be the mashed potatoes.
Right, I remember that.
And so he would do that all the time.
That's funny. Where did he live?
He lived in Queens because it was where I was in.
I guess it's hard to maintain, to even have a friendship when you're only going, once a week, or it's not like you're in a combat zone together or something like that.
I speak to some people that I went to high school with occasionally. About a year ago, a name came up on on the television screen, and it was I recognized the first and middle name. I didn't recognize her married name, and I had gone to high school with her and a few other people. When I went to Jamaica High School.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are you a member of any? No. Okay. Any reason why? No reason. Just that.
Just hadn't.
Okay. So you became an optometrist after you finished with the reserves. You weren't. So did you learn any life lessons from being in the military?
Life lessons. I guess I learned that you should. It's okay to use your rank, but you have to use it judiciously. You can't. Don't try and overpower people just because you have a specific rank.
Well, you were a staff sergeant, right?
I was a staff sergeant.
So what were your duties as a staff sergeant? Did you train anybody or?
Yeah, for a while. That's the reason I have this. I was a drill sergeant. Taught people to do whatever, march and this and whatever happened in their life. I had unusual duties when I was in Camp Drum because I created them.
You created your own work?
Well, to an extent. When they had hospitals under tentage, right, they had what are called lister bags. They stay on a tripod and they're canvas, so the water seeps out of the canvas and evaporates a little bit to keep them cool. And then they also had rows of fire buckets. So at that time I was just a corporal, and I said to Master Sergeant, I said, how would you like me to volunteer to fill up those buckets every day? Which was kind of a ridiculous job because they would only evaporate an inch or two. But I had the qualifications of driving a deuce-and-a-half truck, and the water truck was a deuce-and-a-half truck. So I would go to where you could get the fresh water and come around and spend 2 or 2.5 hours adding 4 inches of water to each of these things.
I guess it let you made the day go a little faster.
Yeah.
Was that it?
It was a real goof-off job,
That's funny. Okay. So do you have any message you would like to leave for future generations when they hear your interview?
When they hear my interview. I think military experience of any sort is very good. I think it helps provide a sense of patriotism and a bit of maturity. Hopefully it doesn't create enough trauma so that you get crazy and go out and shoot people, which happens. Right?
And you probably meet all different people from different walks of life.
I would say if you were in units other than a general hospital, of course you're going to have a lot more diverse people that you meet. In a general hospital, everybody is doctors, nurses, or corpsmen. There's not a lot of laborers.
Right. But overall, it was a good experience for you.
It was a good experience because, first of all, I remained alive and well, right? And I still am very patriotic to this day.
Good. Is there anything you want to discuss that we haven't covered?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you very much
You're welcome.
for doing the interview and coming in. And
Okay.
being
Do you
the
record this too? So that records and photographs.
Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.